The US's biggest rival is moving in on social media and communications, and the US is pushing back hard. This week, we ask, what is going on in China? Hey, welcome. This week we're going to bring you up to date with one of the most important parts of the technology world. It's a place that is a long way away from Silicon Valley, both geographically and culturally. And it's a place that is now challenging the West's tech dominance. I am, of course, talking about China. Now, in Chinese, there is a common phrase, 自相矛盾. Roughly translated, it means a contradiction, like an unstoppable force meeting an immovable object. And over the last few years, we've seen this in world politics. China, the unstoppable force, meeting the USA, the immovable object.
This is Tiananmen Square in Beijing.
When I first went to China nearly 15 years ago, it was already clear that the mighty dragon was awakening and the next technology superpower was rearing its head. Fast forward to 2020 and Chinese companies have broken into the West in a big way. Probably the best known of these are TikTok and Huawei. And they've both drawn criticism, to say the least. Later in the programme we will be looking at TikTok, but the biggest fish here is Huawei. It's been in UK telecoms for 20 years or so now, most recently beginning to be a part of the UK's 5G network. But in July, the government here banned it. To understand what is going on now, here's a quick refresher on Huawei. It may look like Paris, but this is Huawei's brand new campus in Shenzhen, China. A huge site where employees take a train between office buildings, each of which is modelled on a different European city. Few journalists have visited this Disney World-like project, very much the brainchild of Ren Zhongfei, the company's founder. He's been compared to the likes of Steve Jobs, growing his company from a small workshop to a global tech giant, now employing 180,000 people. Huawei is currently enjoying huge success, with revenues last year in excess of $100 billion. But this is also a company facing some serious issues. The biggest is that the US is coming for Huawei in a big way.
Look, we have met the enemy, and it is Huawei, and it is China. Make no doubt about that. You know, right now, Lou, Huawei, through access to unlimited capital from the Chinese government, the communist government, all of this technology, guess what? It's built in for cyber spying, for cyber espionage, because that's what the Chinese do.
The problem is, Mr. Ren was once a member of China's People's Liberation Army. And that's raised suspicions about his links to the Chinese state and whether it and Huawei may have each other's backs. America is adamant that Huawei is a pawn of the Chinese authorities. In 2017, China passed the National Intelligence Law, which says that, if asked, all Chinese companies and citizens must help the government to assist national intelligence efforts. China claims this is part of an effort to safeguard its security. But the fear is that if Huawei supplies any country's 5G network, the Chinese could exploit it. In a future where our entire infrastructure, our economy, and our lives are run by computers talking to each other over a 5G network, what would happen if someone shut that network down?
If you think about it, the future of warfare is not necessarily going to be using traditional armies in the way that we think of, like with the Second World War. The future of warfare is most likely going to be cyber. So without firing a shot, you could take a country out.
It's feared that the Chinese state could order Huawei to build secret backdoors in a 5G network. These would leave the country vulnerable to a nationwide cyber attack. And that could be catastrophic. So, what's new? Well, in May, the US government published one short piece of legislation which had a massive impact on global technology. It may look quite dull, but what this means is that if your company uses American tools and software to make stuff for Huawei, you will break US law. The US will blacklist you. So this stops most companies from supplying Huawei for fear of angering the US. For example, the chips which Huawei used to run its products were manufactured by companies like Taiwan-based TSMC. And TSMC uses some American software to help design and build the chips. So, under this new rule, TSMC can't make chips for Huawei and carry on trading with the US. Which means for many companies, it's a choice between China and the US.
The way chips are produced is very reliant on some tools and techniques that are owned by a very small number of American companies. And what the American government's done is basically say, you can no longer use those. These Chinese companies can no longer use those. So if they carry on using it, it's going to be done illegally, or they're going to have to look for alternative sources. And if they find those alternative sources, it starts to become much more like a black box to us because we have much less of an understanding from a security assurance point of view. And that just tips you over into the point where you say, well, I can't be sure enough about this now, so I'm going to have to not use it.
It's not just the UK that's facing the problem either. Germany, France, in fact almost every nation that was looking to develop 5G capacity had begun to use the cheaper, more advanced Huawei 5G infrastructure. Remember that Chinese phrase? America is becoming the immovable object trying to stop Chinese companies in their tracks. But before you start to think that this all sounds a bit unfair, it is worth recalling that China has banned almost all Western companies for years from the Chinese market. So, what can be done now?
So the short term is that the mobile operators, as well as having the additional cost of taking Huawei out of their networks, they also have no choice but to sign contracts with Nokia and Ericsson. Just having two players in a major market like that is not really a very desirable situation. So the various governments around the world and the operators are keen to open in some way the opportunity for another player at least, and several players potentially, to become alternatives to Nokia and Ericsson.
Hello and welcome to the Week in Tech. This week, the UK's Court of Appeal ruled that South Wales Police's use of facial recognition technology has been unlawful and in violation of human rights. Internet connection and cellular service was shut down in Belarus amid protests following the contested re-election of five-term President Alexander Lukashenko. And after 35 years in the laptop game, Toshiba sold its last share of Dynabook, and with it the company's last stake in the personal computer business. Google announced it plans to build the largest earthquake detection network, using your phone. The Android earthquake alert system uses tiny accelerometers built into every smartphone and location data to act as a seismometer that can help detect quakes and tremors. Is this the future of photography? Google teams Brain and Research have developed an AI model to create 3D images of new and complete scenes using still photographs. The model can even capture lighting changes without compromising the image. And finally, if you're in need of a cuddly friend without the long-term commitment, Moflin could be the closest thing to a real-life pet pal. Developed by Vanguard Industries, Moflin is a pet robot powered by AI. It has sensors and uses an algorithm to map human emotions so it can learn and evolve over time.
China's influence on the world is truly global. Most major cities like here in London have a Chinatown, and the US is no different. There are an estimated 5 million Chinese people living in the States. President Trump's focus on banning TikTok has stolen most of the headlines, but it's his targeting of WeChat that could have an even bigger and more profound impact on US-China relations. That's because WeChat, that came onto the scene in 2011, has morphed into a colossus. It's less of an app and more like an operating system. Here's Chris, a Chinese student studying in London, explaining what it is.
You can find out where have hospitals, where have the restaurant, anything on it. This one you can buy movie tickets. This one you can book in restaurants. This one you can book in hotel. If you want to find out the PlayStation, I have an account for business. I'm selling the things on it.
So it's kind of everything in your life is on this app.
Yeah.
WeChat has become so big, so much a part of everyday life, it's become totally essential to its more than 1 billion users. This is Winnie, originally from Malaysia, who's lived in London for 10 years. How would you describe it to you? How important is it?
Half of my life. You know, old people like my mom, they only know how to send a message similar like WhatsApp, but WeChat is more easy for them. Don't have WeChat, I don't know my mom will cry or not.
Your mom would cry?
Yes. And then it's the family connection, like home feeling. If I don't have this, like I feel lonely.
Tencent, the owner of WeChat, won't say how many users it has outside of China, but it's thought to run into the tens of millions. It, along with other Chinese apps, has caught the attention of the US authorities.
President Trump has mentioned impending action on TikTok, and for good reason. With parent companies based in China, apps like TikTok, WeChat, and others are significant threats to personal data of American citizens.
TikTok is a very different beast to WeChat. To start with, TikTok says that it doesn't actually hold any of its data inside China, and it would never give that data to the Chinese government. Many security experts, though, believe that it's WeChat that holds a much greater security risk. This is the former chief security officer for Yahoo and Facebook, Alex Stamos.
Of all the Chinese companies to worry about, TikTok isn't even in my top 10, probably, right? Because I find TikTok to be, a little bit of just a symbol here, standing in for the entire Chinese industry. Like, probably the Chinese company I'd be most worried about is Tencent because of WeChat. WeChat is one of the most popular messaging apps in the world. It is used by the entire Chinese diaspora, and people run companies on WeChat. They have incredibly sensitive communication. They probably do things that could open them up to blackmail. And so those are the kinds of apps I would start with before an app full of dancing teens.
WeChat has long been criticised for censoring users in China. Then a Canadian analytics company, Citizen Lab, looked into how WeChat moderated its users outside of China.
So we find routinely that topics related to perennial taboo issues like Tiananmen Square, Hong Kong, Falun Gong, anything to do with Tibet or the Dalai Lama, those are pretty routinely censored.
The people we spoke to, though, didn't seem to be too concerned about security issues. The reason why he's saying that he doesn't want it in the US is because he thinks that some of the data from users goes to the Chinese government.
No, this is not the truth. It's not really.
It is like very important to the country. So maybe the government will control it a little bit, but I think that's a good part for us, because if there's no government to control it, it will be something bad will happen.
Researchers, though, not only found WeChat censoring political content, it was also censoring content related to COVID-19.
We looked in particular at censorship around COVID and found that discussions about the pandemic very early on were censored, which is highly significant because, of course, physicians who were on the front lines, who were warning about the pandemic even before it had a name, had their communications censored.
Tencent deny this and told BBC Click that all content shared among international users of WeChat is private. Data security isn't the only reason Trump has decided to ban WeChat. It's far more political than that. And to be honest, it is hard to look past the fact that these tech companies have been sucked into a wider geopolitical battle between two superpowers.
The battle over social media, and especially who owns our personal data, is seen by many as the next big emerging rivalry between China and the US. In March, the Chinese owners of internet hookup app Grindr sold up for $600 million. They've been forced to sell by the US regulators over national security concerns relating to the data on the app. In May, Chinese social media company Kuaishou launched an app in the US called Zin, which, after becoming one of the most popular apps, was removed from both the Google Play Store and Apple's App Store after it was accused of plagiarizing videos. But TikTok is now under pressure from US regulators and may be banned by the White House.
I set a date of around September 15th. At which point it's going to be out of business in the United States.
But over in China, social media has been evolving in a different way. Earlier this year, before the pandemic took hold, Stephen Beckett went to Beijing to meet some of the major players in the Chinese social media landscape.
When it comes to social media, China is a world away from the West. That's in part due to long-term government blocking of US tech giants like Google and Facebook. And that's partially why the country has evolved its own completely distinct online ecosystem. Alibaba is a bit like eBay, Weibo was similar to Twitter, and WeChat started life in much the same way as apps like WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger. Perhaps not a surprise then that for a time China had the reputation of a copycat nation. China, with its huge population of over 1.3 billion people, there's plenty of room for social ideas, and the competition is intense. So these are the head offices of Kuaishou. They're one of the biggest social networks here. They've got over 200 million active users, but unless you're in China, you probably haven't heard of them. Kuaishou has made a name for itself by targeting China's relatively untapped rural population, and that's a lot of people. Around 40% don't live in cities. And that has led to a platform where the stars aren't necessarily what you'd expect. Kuaishou's secret sauce is the options it gives streamers to make their streams pay.
I'm a professional musician. I also give lectures via Kuaishou in my spare time, which teach people how to play the Chinese swana. I try to popularize Chinese traditional music and knowledge.
Between sales of recorded lessons and purchases of virtual gifts during live streams, he says he makes around £15,000 a month, and that's after Kuaishou takes their 25% commission. But Kuaishou's 200 million users isn't quite so impressive when you compare it to China's social titan Tencent and their so-called mega app WeChat. And now WeChat is becoming an even greater part of daily life, thanks to something called mini programs.
WeChat mini program is an app that doesn't require you to download and install. They are sub-applications within the WeChat ecosystem and a new tool developed by WeChat.
Mini programs allow third parties to add new features to WeChat on demand. It's a bit like having the entire App Store already on your phone. The idea is that you can pretty much do everything you could ever want on your phone without ever closing WeChat. So this convenience store is set up on the campus of WeChat's head office. And the idea is you can just walk around, pick up whatever you like, and then walk out the door and it'll get automatically charged to your WeChat account. WeChat relies on users handing over big chunks of their personal data, and now that even includes your face. These vending machines are set up to use WeChat's new facial pay feature. The idea is that you opt into it in the app, and once you've done that, you can use your face to buy anything from these machines. It basically links your face to your WeChat account and your government ID. But is the convenience worth the possible cost to privacy? In 2016, Amnesty International awarded the parent company of WeChat, Tencent, 0 out of 100 for their privacy practices.
I think there's a common perception that people in China don't care about their privacy, and that perception is completely false. The government over the last few years has been trying to roll out its own cybersecurity regulations and trying to educate consumers about the dangers of data being lost or leaked.
WeChat's privacy policy says it will provide the Chinese government access to much of what you do in the app when legally required, including the things you type and data like your location. It's hard to deny that social apps in China have taken on a life of their own, if not outpacing, then going in new directions to competitors in the West. The big question is whether more Chinese apps can follow TikTok in going global, despite the concerns around privacy and censorship. Or if not, it could be the turn of tech companies in the West to play copycat themselves.
That was Stephen Beckett's view of China. And since the explosion of TikTok in the West, other apps have been springing up to try and compete. And Chris Fox has been looking at some of the alternatives that are available.
If you can't get enough of short, hyper-edited videos, luckily there are plenty of apps that have cottoned onto the format. This is Triller, which I think is fair to say has taken a bit of inspiration from TikTok. You can record clips with special effects and share them onto an endless scrolling feed of content. Triller seems to have done quite well out of all this uncertainty. At the start of August, it topped the App Store charts on both iOS and Android, and it's managed to attract some big-name TikTok stars and celebrities over onto its platform, including Mike Tyson and the magician Dynamo. Another app offering a similar experience is Byte, which has also been popping in and out of the App Store top download charts. Like TikTok, it offers you creative effects for your videos, although it is trailing behind Triller. It's been downloaded more than 1 million times on Google Play, whereas Triller's had more than 10 million. TikTok's biggest competition may come from Instagram Reels, Instagram's newly launched rival. It has incorporated many of TikTok's core features, including that endlessly scrolling feed of short videos. Just in the past few weeks, Mark Zuckerberg has appeared at a congressional hearing about big tech companies using their power to neutralize the competition. Isn't ripping off TikTok essentially doing that?
There is innovation everywhere, and people are constantly inspired by what they see. It's no longer a surprise to see a feed in a mobile social product. That wasn't necessarily the case until Facebook brought that to scale. We brought stories to Instagram in 2016 and gave full credit to Snap for inventing that format, but then evolved it from there.
So what is Instagram bringing to the table with this format that makes it different to TikTok?
I think the ability to be discovered is unique to Reels. I think on Instagram historically, if you had a large follower base, it was easy to kind of get bigger. This is now a product specifically designed to help creators find an audience.
Now, to be fair to TikTok, I think the idea that you never know what video is going to go viral or who gets discovered is exactly what draws creators to TikTok. It's certainly not unique to Instagram Reels, but I think companies are seeing that TikTok has refined a winning formula and they want a piece of the action.
And that's it for this week. Next week, we're going to be looking at another hugely important topic, the technology being used to fight climate change. Until then, you can keep up with us on social media, on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram and Twitter at BBC Click. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.